For a few years now, a really high-stakes war has been going on kind of quietly between the US and China. Now, it's not a war fought with soldiers, but with silicon. This is the great semiconductor chip war, and it's a strategic battle that's literally going to define the future of technology, especially AI. So let's break down the moves in this global power play.
You can really think of this whole thing as a massive global game of chess. It's a match where every single move and every counter move is calculated to get an edge. So the big question is, in this super complex game, who is setting up the final checkmate?
So the game kicked off with America's opening move, and it was an aggressive one, designed to control the board right from the get-go.
America's initial strategy was, well, blunt and incredibly powerful. The thinking wasn't, let's have a fair competition and may the best country win. Nope. The goal was to take away China's ability to even play the game on the same level.
This slide just illustrates the power dynamic perfectly. I mean, picture a sword fight. The US strategy wasn't just to show up with a better sword, it was to take China's sword away completely and hand it a little knife, making sure that any fight would be totally lopsided from the very beginning. So how'd they do it? It was this two-pronged attack. First, they straight up banned exporting the most powerful chips to China. And second, they banned the incredibly complex DUV, that's deep ultraviolet lithography machines. These are the absolutely essential multi-million-dollar tools you need to print the circuits on the chips. This created a dual bottleneck designed to stop China's tech progress in its tracks.
But here's the thing about this chess game. China is not just some pawn you can sacrifice. Faced with all this pressure, Beijing basically flipped the board with a powerful counterattack of its own, and they did it by leveraging a pretty unique strategic advantage.
So what was China's weapon of choice? Rare earth minerals. China absolutely dominates not just the mining, but, and this is the crucial part, the incredibly complex processing of these materials. We're talking about stuff that's vital for everything from your iPhone to fighter jets. By threatening to cut off exports, China hit the US where it hurts, and that forced Washington to go back to the drawing board.
Okay, so that retaliation forced the US to pivot. Instead of a total blockade, they switched to a much more subtle and, frankly, controversial strategy, a gambit that's being called tech opium.
And that name, tech opium, is a direct callback to the 19th century Opium Wars, where Britain basically flooded China with opium to create dependency and, destabilize the country. The modern idea here is to get Chinese tech companies hooked on American chips that are good, but not the best, which would hopefully kill their motivation to develop their own.
And here's how they put it into action. The US approved the sale of NVIDIA's Hopper H200 chip. Now, the H200 is an incredibly powerful piece of tech for sure, but as you can see, it's a full generation behind the absolute state-of-the-art, the Blackwell B200 chip. The whole strategy was to give China access to powerful tech, but never the most powerful, keeping them forever playing catch-up.
And that's the real key. A single generation lag like this one translates to about an 18-month technology gap. And that might not sound like a lot, but in the super fast world of AI development, 18 months is basically an eternity. It means China would always be about 1.5 generations behind whatever is cutting edge.
And this wasn't some kind of hidden agenda. Tech billionaire David Sacks said it right out loud in an interview. The idea was to supply these slightly older chips to Chinese companies like Huawei, get them dependent on US tech, and effectively destroy any reason for them to build their own. So, that brings us to the million-dollar question. Did China fall for it? Did this tech opium gambit actually work? Did Chinese companies get hooked on American chips?
Well, the answer so far seems to be a big, resounding no. While the chips are available, the market data shows that Chinese firms are just not that interested. It really looks like they saw the trap from a mile away and are signaling pretty clearly that they'd rather build their own future, even if it's the harder way to go. So instead of buying American, Beijing doubled down. They announced a massive, and I mean $70 billion investment fund to pour right into their own semiconductor industry. It's a clear signal that they are hitting the accelerator on their own path to self-reliance. And this table really gets to the heart of China's long-term thinking. See, to dominate AI, you need 4 key things. And as you can see, China believes it has a huge advantage in 3 of them: cheaper electricity, way more engineers, and a massive industrial base. For Beijing, advanced chips are basically the final piece of the puzzle they need to solve. All right, so let's look at the board now. Where does this all leave us? The US tried to force a quick checkmate, but now it's looking more like a stalemate, or maybe a long, drawn-out endgame.
And this is where things get really interesting, maybe even a little ironic. When this whole chip war started, experts figured China was about 7 generations behind in semiconductor tech. But today, as this chart shows, that gap has shrunk to just 1.5 generations. It kind of seems like the blockade, paradoxically, actually lit a fire under China's own innovation.
And on top of all that, China's getting really creative with workarounds. They're doing things like renting computing power from cloud companies that aren't under the same bans. There's also a whole sophisticated smuggling market that gets the latest chips into the country, where local engineers can then take them apart and reverse engineer them.
So the bottom line here is pretty clear. The tech opium strategy, this whole big gambit to create a dependent China and stop its progress, it just isn't playing out the way the US planned. China has refused the bait and is now charting its own course. Which all leads us to one huge final question. Right now, the US still holds the crown in chip design. For now. But China has a commanding lead in almost every other resource you need for AI dominance. We're talking power, people, and production. So, is it just a matter of time before China closes that final gap and declares checkmate in the global tech war?